Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. Nobody cares about your music, old man. The words cut through the rain-soaked air, sharper than the December chill. Laughter followed as the teenagers tossed nickels at his feet, smartphones raised to capture his humiliation. The musician's fingers, cracked and reddened from cold, never stopped moving across the guitar strings, his eyes fixed on something beyond the indifferent crowd. Pedestrians streamed past, their reflections stretching and contracting in rain-slicked sidewalks. Some quickened their pace, pretending not to hear. Others clutched designer shopping bags, maintaining a calculated distance from the rain-soaked figure whose melodies haunted the night air. The man's guitar case remained nearly empty, save for the mocking coins and a faded photograph. The hunched figure in the long coat paused at the edge of the gathering crowd, his face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. For a moment, time seemed suspended between heartbeats. Something in the homeless musician's song had cut through the urban noise, reaching someone who understood its worth. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The musician's name was Thomas Wright, though no one had used his full name in years. On the streets, he was just Old Tom, a fixture easily overlooked, like a weathered bench or a cracked sidewalk tile. His fingers, once celebrated in recording studios from Nashville to Los Angeles, now struggled against arthritis and frostbite. Yet they remembered. Every chord, every note, his hands recalled what the world had forgotten. The teenagers, 5 of them bundled in expensive winter coats, circled closer. Their leader, a boy with gelled hair and a designer scarf, nudged his friends and raised his phone higher. "Hey, play something good and maybe you'll earn a real dollar." His companions laughed on cue, the sound brittle against the soft melancholy of Tom's guitar. Their expensive sneakers avoided puddles while the musician sat soaked through, the rain having long ago penetrated his threadbare jacket. The melody he played was his own composition, something from before, when stages had lights and audiences had respect. A young woman paused briefly, seemingly moved by the music, but her companion pulled her away with a whispered comment about enabling homelessness. A businessman rushed past, one hand clutching an umbrella, the other pressed to his ear as he loudly negotiated into his phone. The crowd's indifference formed an invisible barrier around Tom, defining his place in their world. One of the teenagers dropped a half-eaten sandwich near the guitar case, smirking as his friends laughed at his generosity. The storm intensified, sheets of rain sweeping across the street. Store owners began pulling down their security gates, lights blinking out one by one. The evening shopping crowd thinned, hurrying toward parking garages and subway entrances. Soon, Tom would need to find shelter. The overnight temperatures were expected to drop below freezing. But something kept him playing, some stubborn flame of dignity or perhaps simple desperation. Each note was a defiant statement. "I am still here. I still create beauty, even if no one stops to hear it." The teenager's laughter grew louder, drowning out the delicate bridge of his song. The figure in the long coat drew closer, moving with unhurried purpose. Something in his gait suggested a man accustomed to being watched, though tonight he moved through the world unrecognized. He paused at the periphery of Tom's invisible stage, listening. The rain traced rivulets down his coat, but he seemed indifferent to it. The teenagers, sensing a new audience, performed more enthusiastically for him than for the musician. "Check out this bum's face when I request Wonderwall," the leader announced, pulling out his wallet with theatrical flair. The man in the coat remained still, his attention focused solely on the music. Tom's fingers moved into a complex minor progression, a fragment of something that had once earned standing ovations. The teenagers grew increasingly loud, competing with the song, but the coated figure stepped closer, entering the circle of emptiness around the musician. His movement was subtle but deliberate, like a stone breaching the surface of still water. The lead teenager faltered mid-joke, recognition dawning slowly across his face. The world seemed to hold its breath as the stranger removed his hat, raindrops cascading from its brim. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Johnny Depp stood in the rain, his presence creating an immediate ripple effect. Pedestrians who had hurried past now slowed, doubled back, phones emerging from pockets. The teenagers froze in tableau, their mockery suspended mid-gesture. The leader's mouth hung slightly open, the dollar bill he'd been waving now limp between his fingers. But Depp wasn't looking at them. His eyes remained fixed on Tom's weathered hands as they coaxed music from the old guitar. "Don't stop," Depp said softly when Tom's fingers faltered in surprise. "That progression, is it your own?" The musician nodded, uncertainty crossing his face. Around them, the gathering crowd maintained a respectful distance, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something more complex as they reassessed the homeless man through Depp's obvious interest. The teenagers shuffled backward, phones now lowered, suddenly conscious of how they must appear in their recorded videos. The rain continued unabated, but no one seemed to notice anymore. "I used to play with Keith Richards occasionally," Depp continued, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearest. "He would appreciate what you're doing with those minor sevenths." Tom's eyes widened slightly at the comparison. His fingers, as if given new life, moved with greater confidence across the strings. The music swelled against the backdrop of rainfall, no longer fighting to be heard, but now commanding attention. The lead teenager slipped his phone into his pocket, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and shame. Depp removed his coat despite the rain and placed it carefully over Tom's shoulders, the gesture so natural it seemed rehearsed. Several onlookers captured the moment, their expressions softening. "You'll catch your death," Tom protested weakly, but his fingers never stopped playing. Depp shook his head. "Music matters more than staying dry. Always has." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. A woman who had earlier hurried past now opened her umbrella over both men, her previously averted eyes now meeting Tom's with unexpected warmth. "I know you," Tom said suddenly, recognition dawning. "Saw your band play in Memphis, '97. You were good then too." Depp smiled, genuine surprise crossing his features. Not many remember those days. The crowd had grown, spilling into the street. Cars slowed, drivers peering through rain-streaked windows. Someone began a Facebook live stream. The teenagers stood awkwardly at the edge of the gathering, their earlier cruelty now immortalized in their own videos, impossible to edit away. The leader took a step forward, his hand moving toward his wallet again, but with different intention. "Play something together," called a voice from the crowd. Others joined in encouraging murmurs. Depp glanced at Tom, eyebrows raised in question. The older musician nodded, shifting his guitar slightly. "Know any blues in E?" Tom asked. Depp crouched beside him, seemingly oblivious to the puddle soaking his pants. "Blues was my first language," he replied, just loud enough for Tom to hear. The moment felt intimate despite the growing audience, a private exchange between artists recognizing each other beyond circumstance. Tom began a classic 12-bar progression, his technique revealing years of disciplined practice beneath the surface of homelessness. Depp joined in, humming harmony, occasionally offering soft vocal phrases that complemented Tom's guitar work. The rain seemed to play percussion around them, tapping on umbrellas and awnings. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, differences temporarily suspended as the impromptu performance bridged social divides. A woman in designer heels stood beside a delivery man, both swaying slightly to the rhythm. "That's Thomas Wright," someone whispered, the name moving through the crowd like an electric current. "Session guitarist for Bluestone Records in the '80s. Phones searched his name, old album covers appearing on screens. Recognition spread across faces as the connection between the homeless man and his former life emerged in search results. The teenagers huddled around their own phone, their expressions transforming as they scrolled through images of a younger Tom, standing alongside music legends, guitar in hand, smile confident. The lead teenager pushed through the crowd, his steps hesitant but determined. He stopped before Tom and Depp, now visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know." He trailed off, understanding the inadequacy of his words. Depp's eyes met the boy's without judgment or absolution, letting the moment's discomfort stand as its own lesson. Tom nodded acknowledgement without interrupting the song, his dignity never more apparent than in this gesture of forgiveness. The music swelled into something transcendent, the kind of performance that becomes embedded in memory. People who had been hurrying home now stood transfixed, rain-soaked, and transformed. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. The surrounding crowd quieted as Tom's guitar told his story more eloquently than words ever could. His playing had acquired a luminous quality, decades of joy and hardship channeled through 6 strings. Depp provided subtle accompaniment, deliberately keeping himself secondary to Tom's performance. The rain had softened to a gentle mist that caught the streetlights like suspended stars. Someone had brought coffee in paper cups for both musicians, steam rising between them like shared breath. "I had a record deal once," Tom said between phrases, his voice carrying clearly now that the crowd had hushed. "Made 2 albums before the label folded." His fingers moved into a melody from those forgotten recordings. Depp recognized it immediately. Second track, Desert Highway. "I had that album." The surprise in Tom's eyes was quickly replaced by something deeper, the profound recognition of being remembered when you've grown accustomed to invisibility. Nearby, a woman wiped tears from her cheeks, not bothering to hide her emotion. The guitar case at Tom's feet was no longer an object of mockery, but a vessel filling with respect. Bills of various denominations accumulated, dropped without fanfare or expectation. The teenager who had earlier led the taunting placed his entire wallet into the case, a gesture both excessive and somehow exactly right. "Keep it all," he said, voice thick with complicated emotion. A man in a business suit who had earlier rushed past now stood transfixed, his neglected umbrella dripping rainwater down his expensive collar. He reached into his coat, produced a business card, and crouched to place it carefully beside the money. "Call me tomorrow," he said to Tom. "I produce music downtown." Videos of the unlikely duet spread across social platforms with unprecedented speed, hashtags multiplying, Johnny and Thomas, Jark Street Music Magic, Your Second Chances, comment sections filled with discussions about homelessness, celebrity responsibility, and the healing power of music. The live audience continued to grow, spilling across the street. Nearby restaurants brought out food, steaming plates offered without condescension, received with gracious nods between musical phrases. "I never stopped playing," Tom explained during a brief pause, his voice stronger now. "Even when I lost everything else." Depp nodded, understanding visible in his eyes. "Music stays when everything else leaves," he replied, the simple truth resonating with everyone listening. A restaurant owner approached, navigating the crowd with determination. "My brother manages a shelter 3 blocks from here," he said directly to Tom. "Clean bed, good people. I'll take you there myself after this." The offer hung in the air, neither charity nor command, but something rarer: respect. Tom's fingers moved into a different melody, something original and hauntingly beautiful. "I wrote this last year," he said, sleeping under the West Side Bridge. The composition's complexity belied its origins, revealing how Tom had maintained his gift through circumstances that might have extinguished it in someone else. Depp listened, his expression revealing genuine admiration. The crowd grew absolutely silent, collective breath held as the song built toward its emotional peak. For those moments, the hierarchy of society, who mattered and who didn't, who deserved attention and who was invisible, dissolved completely. When Tom finished his composition, the silence held for 3 heartbeats before applause erupted. Not the polite acknowledgement of street performers, but the thunderous recognition reserved for concert halls. Depp stepped back, giving Tom the spotlight he'd earned decades ago and somehow lost along the way. The older musician stood, Depp's coat still around his shoulders, and bowed slightly, professional instincts returning from some deep muscular memory. The businessman with the card stepped forward again. "I mean it about tomorrow," he said, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "That composition needs to be recorded properly." His words carried the weight of expertise rather than charity. Several heads nodded in agreement. Tom looked at the card, then at the faces surrounding him, not looking through him anymore, but seeing him fully. The transformation in the crowd's perception was palpable, moving from dismissal to recognition of individual humanity. The teenagers who had begun the evening as tormentors now stood respectfully silent, their education and empathy visible in their posture. "Sometimes the world doesn't notice what's valuable until someone else points it out," Depp said, addressing everyone, yet no one in particular. But the value was always there. He gestured toward Tom with a subtle nod. The crowd's murmur of agreement swelled, people looking at each other with new awareness, as if Depp's words had illuminated something beyond this single interaction. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the street glistening beneath the city lights. Tom carefully placed his guitar in its case, his movements deliberate and dignified. What had begun as humiliation had transformed into validation, not just of his music, but of his fundamental worth as a human being. "It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." By morning, the videos had gone viral across every platform. Thomas Wright's name trended globally, his story unearthed by eager journalists. Former session musician, songwriter credited on gold records, lost to addiction and hard luck, but never separated from his music. Interviews with music historians revealed his uncredited contributions to famous songs. Former collaborators expressed shock at discovering his whereabouts after years of unsuccessful searching. Depp's publicist released a simple statement: "Music speaks its own truth and needs no translation from me." The restaurant owner had made good on his promise. Tom had slept in a real bed for the first time in months. The business card had led to a morning meeting, then to a small recording contract. Modest, but legitimate. The teenager who had apologized started a GoFundMe that reached 6 figures before noon, managed by a reputable homeless advocacy organization to ensure the funds would provide sustainable support. "I never expected this," Tom told a local reporter outside the shelter, Depp's coat still around his shoulders despite the clearing weather. His voice carried the cautious hope of someone accustomed to disappointment. I just kept playing because that's who I am, even when no one was listening. His weathered fingers, the tools of his art, rested gently on the guitar case now filled with possibility instead of mockery. The same reporter had interviewed several witnesses from the previous night, their accounts tinged with the uncomfortable recognition of how they'd previously perceived the homeless. A week later, Tom performed at a small venue downtown. The show sold out within minutes of being announced. Depp attended quietly, declining to join on stage despite the crowd's enthusiasm. "This is his moment," he explained to those seated nearby. Tom played for 2 hours, his fingers stronger with each passing day of proper nutrition and shelter. Between songs, he spoke briefly about homelessness, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of experience. The audience listened with newfound receptivity. Local homeless shelters reported an unprecedented surge in volunteers and donations. The teenagers who had begun as antagonists organized a benefit concert at their school, raising awareness about mental health and addiction. Their leader, interviewed for the school newspaper, spoke with the rawness of genuine remorse. "I never thought about who people were before they ended up on the street. I never considered their stories." His admission sparked similar conversations among his peers. The businessman who'd offered his card became Tom's producer and eventually his friend. There was always commercial potential in his work, he explained during a radio interview, but more importantly, there was truth. Tom's new recording, a simple album of guitar compositions named after city landmarks where he'd slept rough, received critical acclaim for its technical brilliance and emotional honesty. Music blogs noted the technique he'd developed during years on the street, innovations born from adversity that now influenced younger guitarists. 3 months after the rainy night that changed everything, Tom returned to the same street corner. This time he came by choice rather than necessity, dressed in clean clothes his guitar professionally maintained. He set up his case, the same weathered one, now a symbol rather than a necessity, and began to play. Within minutes, a crowd gathered, respectful and attentive. No one pretended not to see him, no one rushed past. A young homeless woman watched from across the street, clutching a battered violin case to her chest. Tom noticed her, recognized the familiar hesitation, and gestured for her to join him. The invitation, musician to musician, human to human, crossed boundaries of gender, age, and circumstance. After a moment's hesitation, she crossed the street and carefully removed her violin. Together, they created something neither could have made alone. Depp's coat still hung in Tom's apartment, a reminder that visibility often requires someone else's eyes. But Tom had learned something beyond gratitude, that his worth had never depended on recognition, that his music had been valuable even when played to empty streets and hostile faces. "Keep playing your truth," he told the young violinist after their impromptu duet, "even when no one seems to hear it." She nodded, understanding passing between them like electricity through perfectly tuned strings. The cycle had been broken, then transformed. What began with mockery had become a different kind of viral, spreading not humiliation but its precise opposite, the recognition of humanity in unexpected places. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.